Welcome to this podcast. Is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This is episode 147. Today's guest is a prolific stand-up comedian, actor, and writer. He's toured all over the country and the world for more than 45 years. You know him from Judd Apatow's Funny People, Two Stupid Dogs, and Blue Collar TV. He's appeared on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Late Show with David Letterman multiple times. He has comedy specials on HBO and Showtime. He co-hosts the popular podcast You Don't Know Schiff with Lowell Benjamin. He co-edited the acclaimed book I Killed, True Stories of the Road from America's Top Comics. And of course, his new book with a foreword by Jerry Seinfeld, Why Not? Lessons on Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah is available now wherever you buy books. Please welcome Mark Schiff. Mark, thanks for joining.
Thank you. And I could tell by the way you said the last word there that you're not a member of the Jewish tribe.
No, I'm not.
No, I could tell you said chutzpah. You got to get the phlegm there, Tony. It's chutzpah. Give me a shot at it. Come on, let's try chutzpah.
Chutzpah.
All right, that's passed. You passed. Now we'll just circumcise you and you're in.
I'll pass on that one, Mark, but pleasure to have you on the program. Obviously, this is the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. And let's be honest, Jerry Seinfeld's not Jerry Seinfeld without Mark Schiff and that friendship. So take us back, Mark. 1976, you first laid eyes upon Jerry Seinfeld. Tell us a little bit about how you met him and how the friendship came to be.
Sure. So I started in comedy in around 1976. And I started the Improv. I auditioned there 17 weeks in a row. And I finally got through the door there, which meant that I could stand around for the next 2 years without getting on. And then the comic strip uptown started a club. I went up there one day. I heard there was a club opening called the Comic Strip. And they did not even have a floor in yet. It was just dirt. And we went in and we auditioned for Richie Tinkin, standing in a pile of dirt while he sat in a chair. And he passed me the audition. And they said they're going to open the club in a couple of months, whenever it was. And that's where I met a lot of my friends that I'm still friends with today. And one of them is Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry and I met in 1976. We kind of, gravitated to each other. We became friends. And neither one of us had ever done stand-up really before. And night after night, we just showed up at the clubs, and there he was, there I was, there was Paul Reiser, there was, Gilbert Gottfried, Larry Miller, George Wallace. They were all there every single night. And I was working when I first got there. I didn't actually have a real job. I was writing in, but Jerry was working at Burger Brew, waiter, I believe it was. And he also sold jewelry on the street, make a couple of bucks. And, he would ride over on his little motorcycle, like a 175, I think it was, cross town. He lived in a little studio apartment. And we hung out every night. And I would go in and watch him every night. He would come out, come in and watch me. And then we'd go watch Reiser. And that was it. We'd get on stage for about 10 minutes. 15 minutes at the most. And then we sit at the bar for hours and go over material. And then at the end of the night, after we went to the Catch a Rising Star, where we probably did not get on, we'd go over a place called the Green Kitchen. Get there around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and fresh donuts and cookies were being made in the ovens there. And we took a booth just not unsimilar to the show Seinfeld, and we crammed a whole bunch of us in a booth every night, and we just hung out till 4 or 5 in the morning. Green Kitchen was open 24 hours a day. People said, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Why do they even need a front door? If you never close, save a couple of bucks on a door. And we would hang out, and then we'd be in one booth, and then Carol Leifer would come in with Kathy Ladman, and they pile in another booth, and before you know it, there were cab drivers and comedians in there. Cabbies would park out front, and they'd have a little lunch, a place to go to the bathroom, a little dinner, whatever they were doing, and we just hang out. We all taped our acts, and we would sometimes play a little new bit that we did for each other and go over it. So that's how it all started. And when you're thrown into close quarters like that with somebody, there's a good chance you might become friends. So, starting in comedy was like starting in nursery school or kindergarten. Now, you made some friends, and then you went through school with them. And that's what it was. This was our education.
Yeah, and that scene you just described, you actually detail that in your book too, when you're kind of talking about the life of a comedian and how that's your world, that nighttime world, that 3 a.m. in the diner that you mentioned, that whole, that when the city kind of comes alive and you guys are telling your
That's right.
stories and the cab drivers are there and stuff. That I mean, it's funny because it sounds, glamorous, but obviously it's not, right? You guys are all starting out like you said, but it's what and it's and you have to come to love that to make it through a comedy career, especially for 45 years. So it's great to hear you kind of talk about that, how you all kind of meet there and you're all telling stories and sharing, and you're in it together, right? And then so it's interesting to me that world, because you're all in it together then, and then a Jerry might pop here, or a Leno might pop there, or a Larry Miller might pop, or Paul Reiser. Like as that happens, you guys are all still friends and all with each other the whole way up. It's interesting to kind of see that, and how those friendships, like you said, are still lasting to this day. And maybe you could touch on that is as your careers progressed, maybe like what that was like from your perspective and working with those guys as far as
Sure.
as you kind of move through.
Sure. Well, it's funny. The word glamorous, look, we weren't at Caesar's palace,
Right.
but the dream was to just get funny.
Right.
See, Jerry never planned to get a show. Reiser didn't plan to get a show. Nobody planned anything. There were no clubs across the country that worked. There was no work for us when we first started. There was the Catskill Mountains, some nightclubs across the country, which we didn't think we would ever be right for. And we just, the guys I mentioned, like Reiser, Seinfeld, myself, Gilbert Gottfried, the only thing we wanted to do was to become as funny as we could possibly become. That was the deal. And it wasn't cutthroat. LA was kind of cutthroat. There was a lot more drugs and booze out there, and people drinking and doing stuff. None of us, that wasn't a big part of the thing. We didn't go out after the thing and start snorting things and smoking things. There never one night of that. And other people did it at the clubs, and we were very supportive of each other. I was happy when Jerry would grab a new bit. We also had a code back then. There weren't that many comedians. There weren't a lot. We were in this generation coming up. Robert Klein was already out. Elaine Boozler was out. This guy Andy Kaufman was gone. And they were the generation before us. We would watch them every night. Bobby Kelton, Andy Kaufman, Elaine Boozler. It was amazing. There was a very supportive group that I had coming up. Nobody wished harm on anybody, and we didn't. So, like, let's say Jerry is doing a routine on, I don't know, vacuum and cleaning, using a vacuum. And I had a routine on using a vacuum that I had been doing for 4 months before he started it. I could say to him, Jerry, I do that. I do something very similar. And he would drop the routine. That was the code. That if you said to somebody, I've been doing that. When did you start? They go, I just started that 2 weeks ago. Well, I've been doing it for 4 months. You can ask Silver at the Improv or Richie. And they would go, okay, I'm not going to do it. And if you were considered a joke thief, there's a good chance you wouldn't get in this little club.
Interesting. So, I mean, competitive business, I suppose, but it sounds like it's kind of a fraternity, a family. You mentioned, Green Kitchen. Did you guys write together? Like you mentioned the vacuum cleaner thing. Like, hey, Jerry, I did it this way, or if you were going to take it, you could take it in this direction. Would any of that happen? Like, at Jerry's studio and things like that?
His little apartment that he lived with George Wallison?
Yeah.
It was incredible. He had a tiny little apartment. I think it was a 5th floor walk up. Probably $150 a month. I don't know what it was, but it surely wasn't over, I don't think, $200. And we didn't go back to his house to write, but we would sit in the clubs. And if he had a routine, or just like things pop in my head when I'm writing something, like when I watch Jerry, or Reiser, something will pop I always have a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll write down the notes. And then after I'll go, hey, listen, I got this idea. You like it? You got this, use this, put this, and we fix up the routines. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we give it a shot because we're all different. Every comedian is completely different than the other one. So we're not worried about anything. And Jerry started making money when they started asking him to MC at the comic strip.
Mm.
It was maybe $50 a night or something. So that was paying his rent. I had a 3-bedroom apartment. Me and another, my friend John and myself. It was $350 a month, 3 bedrooms, and we got a third roommate, and we charged him $300. My rent to live in Manhattan was $25 a month for 5 years.
Wow.
And that's what put me through my comedy college type of thing. That I can go to the clubs every night without having to get a day job.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. And one of the stories I loved in the book was when you and Jerry during that time when you're really scraping by, like you said, $100 here, $50 there, and you drove out to see Rodney Dangerfield, and the two of you kind of finagled your way into meeting him after the show. Just a great story. Just curious, those kind of trips. I'm sure there's some bonding going on, like you said, and just late night talks and things. Maybe you could touch on just what that was like, the drive, maybe that
Sure.
that maybe
So there were 2 drives. One was the first road gig we ever had, that I ever had, and Jerry ever had. We took together to Washington D.C. in my 1976 Toyota Corolla, and I turned Jerry on to Frank Sinatra. He had never really heard much Frank Sinatra. I had my 8-track player in the car. I put on Sinatra Live at the Sands. So we listened to that all the way down to Washington, D.C., where we worked at a place called Garvin's Grill. And that was our first road gig together. We stayed at a place called the Shore Americana. We each had our own hotel room. Could you imagine that? It was unbelievable. It wasn't a comedy condo. It was a hotel room just for me alone and him. It was amazing. And the ride out to Rodney was, we already had moved to California. And Jerry was living out there, and he had a little Fiat. And there's another comedian named Steve Middleman, an incredibly funny guy. So I said to Jerry, Rodney's in Vegas. Why don't we go? And he said, yeah, we'll take, we took his Fiat, and we drove from LA to Vegas. And then when we got there, we realized we had no money. You don't go to Vegas with nothing. So we went to the theater where Rodney was playing, and we went up to the maitre d', guy in a tuxedo, and there we are, 3 guys. And he said, "Can I help you?" And you go, "Yeah." We said, "We're friends with Rodney," which we weren't. We had seen him come in to Catch a Rising Star a couple of times working on the Tonight Show sets. And he goes, "Are you friends with Rodney?" I said, "Yeah, we're comedians." He goes, "So what do you want?" I said, "We'd like to come see the show." Told us to pop by, which he never told us. So he said, "Let me go talk to him." And he goes, talks to Rodney, and we're all sweating it out there. We have no idea what he's going to come back and say. And the guy goes, Rodney said, "Okay, come on in. You got us a booth." We didn't have any money to tip the guy, which you're supposed to do when you get a booth in Vegas, especially, right in the middle, in the center. And he goes, "Rodney wants to see you guys after the show." So we saw Rodney. He was unbelievable. We all agree that Rodney was probably the best Tonight Show comedian that ever lived. He was absolutely perfect for the Tonight Show. And after the show, we go back to see Rodney. And he's looking at us, goes, he has no idea, like, "What are you guys? What's going on here, man?" So we said, "We'll Catch a Rising Star. We met you there." "All right." And then he goes, so he just accepted that. And then he goes, "Come on, I'll take you out to dinner." And we go to this deli. No, we go to a Chinese restaurant. And Rodney, the waiter comes over and says, "Okay, Mr. Dangerfield, what would you like?" And Rodney goes, "I want to start with some matzo ball soup." We're in a Chinese restaurant. And he orders a matzo ball soup. This is just absolutely hysterical. So the waiter goes, "Okay." Obviously, he'd done this before. The waiter goes out of the Jewish deli, next door to the Chinese, or the Chinese waiter goes out and goes to the deli, which is next door, and gets matzo ball soup and brings it back into the Chinese restaurant. So they give Rodney matzo ball soup, and then we all ate. And Rodney goes, "Where you guys staying tonight?" And we said, "Oh, we're going back." "How come? We don't have any money." And Rodney lost his mind. He goes, how the F could you come out to Vegas with no money with us? You're out of your friggin' minds. So he said, I'll tell you what, if you want, I have an extra room. My manager, I get a room for me and one for my manager. I'll give you my manager's room. And then he says, whatever you do, don't screw me on the phone calls, long distance calls. And he wanted to make sure we weren't going to call like New York or, start dialing and stick them with, some $300 phone bill. The guy's headlining it, in Vegas, and he's worried about, a $40 phone bill. So that was our experience with Rodney there. I have another Rodney story, which you want to hear it?
I mean, that one's, Rodney must have been
good.
A big influence for you, I imagine. I mean, with all your Tonight Show work and the whole thing, right?
He was amazing. Rodney was so kind to all of us and so great. Watching him on Tonight Show, he used to come into the clubs and break into Tonight Show. But the first money I ever made writing, I sold a joke to Rodney, $25. And the joke was, I'll tell you, you're getting old. I went to the cemetery to visit my father, and two guys chased me with shovels. That was, and he killed with it on Tonight Show. But he also was an honest guy. He said, are you sure you wrote this yourself? You didn't hear somebody else do it. You didn't steal it. He wanted to make sure that it was an original joke. So Rodney was on the Tonight Show when it was like not an hour. He was on when it was an hour and a half. And comedians later on in the 1 hour version, we would do 5 minutes standing and maybe 2 or 3 minutes sitting down. When Rodney did, it was like 15 minutes. They would do like 9 minutes, 8 minutes standing, and then like 6, 7 minutes. You know how many jokes that is for Rodney? One-liners. So I said to Rodney one time, we'd like to see some of your old Tonight Shows because you couldn't get them. There was no YouTube. And he said, come up to my house on the east side when you and Jerry are in town, and I'll show them to you. So one time Jerry and I are in town, and I said, let's call Rodney, go up to his house. Call him up. He says, come on up. We go up. And so Rodney is famous. You've heard this for wearing bathrobes. You've heard this, right?
Yeah. I
always with the bathrobe.
Yeah.
So I said to Jerry, I guarantee you he's going to answer the door wearing a bathrobe. And Jerry goes, no, there's no way. He's having company come over. Who wears a bathrobe? He's going to be dressed. I said, no, I'll bet. And we bet $1. I bet Jerry $1. And we even shook on it. You know the way you shake when I bet you $1, man. Rodney opens the door. He's in a bathrobe. And we both start laughing. I said to Jerry, you owe me $1. And Rodney goes, what's so funny? I go, well, we made a bet that I said you're going to wear a bathrobe. And Rodney takes us into the bedroom, opens his closet door. He has over 100 bathrobes. He had the greatest, and he starts talking about them like they're great works of art. He goes, this one I got in France, in Paris, France. I got this one on the East Side about 2 years ago. This was a present from the Queen. It was just, and in the house with him was Joe Ancis. You know that name?
No.
Joe Ancis was Lenny Bruce's best friend in the world.
Wow.
And Rodney's best friend. And some people thought that Joe Ancis was one of the funniest guys, but never had the nuggets to get up on stage himself. So we went up there, and Joe was smoking some weed. Rodney was smoking some weed. And we sat down, and we didn't smoke with him, but we watched a couple of Tonight Shows with him and had a great time.
Wow.
And I won $1 from Jerry.
And you owe it all to just kind of having the chutzpah, if you will, of just sneaking in and telling people that you knew him. Incredible. So just go, and then I guess I don't know what year that was, but let's fast forward to 1989, or let's say 88, when the whole Seinfeld phenomenon started. It's interesting. You mentioned a bunch of comedians. One of the names I didn't hear was Larry David. So
sure,
NBC came to Jerry. Obviously George Shapiro put in a good word, the whole thing, and then obviously Jerry met up with Larry and kind of partnered with him. Curious how that whole thing came about. Obviously, there was a big group of friends. Just curious what Jerry told you about how that whole thing started. How his friendship with Larry.
Sure.
to your point, we hear about Wallace, Larry Miller, you, of course, Reiser. We hear about Larry David now, but just curious, back then, 88, 89, how that whole thing came about.
So when we first started, Larry was there every night at the Improv, little Catch a Rising Star. Never really came over to the comic strip. He was mostly Catch a Rising Star, a little bit, mostly the Improv. That's where he spent his time. And that's where, if everything they said about Larry was pretty much true. He never knew what he was going to do on stage. He would go on, and if after one or two jokes he didn't like the audience, he'd drop the mic and walk off, and the next guy had to recover from that. Or he would do a set, and he had some classic routines, but he was, a bit of a testy guy. I remember going up to his house, and he is in the towers there in the 40s, where all the actors and comedians lived, and he was writing some scripts at the time. So we all became friends, Larry, Jerry, Reiser. But what happened, the way I seem to understand some of it, is that, Jerry was on the Tonight Show a lot. And there were no offers yet. He was on many, many times, a couple of dozen times. And George had to call the, NBC and say, listen, what about this guy? They weren't so hip to it. They didn't really know, so George spoke to them, and they said, okay, let's do something here. They went back and watched the shows and learned a lot about Jerry. And I'm sure Jerry went into a meeting there. He's a very amicable guy, and he's incredibly funny on and off stage. And they made the deal, and him and Larry got together, and it was the Seinfeld Chronicles, which that was the original name. And first season, not so good, right? Had a lot of people watching. And Jerry even got a letter from NBC that they weren't so sure about these unlikable characters. Generally TV is likable people. Not people, who are so selfish and self-centered like the characters on the show. But it built and built and built the show. And boy, did it take on a life of its own. And it became arguably the best sitcom ever.
Yeah, we're still talking about it today. Any stories that, obviously you're probably a big fan of the show as well. Any stories you remember from the actual show that were about you or about you and Jerry and an experience? Obviously, Jerry tied a lot of experiences into the actual sitcom. Right. Any of yours that popped that you recall?
So Jerry used to call me periodically. I'm known as a numbers expert. Like when you need a funny number, there are numbers that are funny and there are numbers not so funny. Yeah. So when they'd be working on a script and they need a funny number, I'd be the 911 call, and Jerry would call and listen. We need something, and he'd tell me the joke. I go 187, whatever it was, and it was always perfect. Sometimes we talked about fixing up a little something there. We discussed early on the strength of him doing the stand-up in the beginning.
Yeah.
First, how many seasons? Was it 3 seasons? And that was hard. Writing new stand-up every week and doing it in front of a live audience. And but what it did for Jerry, I believe, and because there were other comedians who got shows, but people didn't really know they were a stand-up. See, Jerry accomplished that. It was brilliant. He was an actor. The show has his name, and everybody knew he was a stand-up. So when the show eventually ended, or even during the show, he did a couple of runs, and we went all over the world together, and did some shows together. People knew. They put up Jerry Seinfeld. They said, he's a comedian. Let's go see him. He's great. So that really took on a life of its own. I'll tell you a funny story. One time I went to the studio to watch an episode and to have lunch with Jerry. Called him up. I said, let's have lunch. And I went to CBS Radford. And I pull into the lot with my 76 Toyota Corolla. And I parked next to his probably $250,000 Porsche. And Jerry comes out and I said, I've never driven, one of these Porsche things, And he goes, "You want it?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, here's the keys. Give me your keys. I'll take your Toyota tonight, and you take the Porsche." And that was the last time you saw Jerry driving a 1976 Toyota Corolla. I guarantee you that, with a dented passenger side door. In fact, there was a different color door. The car was brown, and I had a yellow door. I went to a junkyard and I needed a door, and they put on a yellow door. And there's Jerry driving around, star of Seinfeld, in a 1976 Toyota with a yellow door. And he gave me his Porsche. To tell you that I was scared to drive this $200,000 car would be, I was afraid if I just pictured myself coming back, just handing him a steering wheel, going, "I'm really sorry about this. This is all that's left of this car," because, if you're not used to driving those cars, you got to learn what to do. But he was kind enough to give me and loan me that car. Also, we had a moment when his father passed on. I had heard, and I called him up. And I went to his house, and we sat. He was living in an apartment house called North Sherborne, and he hadn't had the show yet. He hadn't done the show. And we sat on his little stairs like you do in New York on a stoop. And we talked about his dad. And then I had the honor to drive him to the airport to go back to New York, with the family. So we were close. We spent a lot of time together then, and we spent a lot of time together now.
Yeah, you could tell the friendship is there, and just just from reading your book too, there's definitely some stories that I don't want to give too many of them away. I want people to go get it, but
well, you saw the foreword, right? You saw the foreword. You saw what he wrote.
Yep,
it was
exactly.
It makes me cry almost. He says, "I'm the best
Imagine.
comedy pal you could go through this with. He wouldn't want to go through it without me." When he wrote that and sent it to me, I stopped in my tracks. One of the greatest things is to be able to sit with Jerry or Paul or any of these guys, Leno. These are masters. And to be able to sit and work routines with them and have their respect for your comedy. I mean, how many people would love to do that? And I have tremendous gratitude.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and just from reading your book, it seems like you have. I don't know if you ever thought about like being almost like there's a lot of wisdom in it, is what I'm trying to say. It's almost like a rabbi, almost in a way. Like you have these one-liners, like the "never be afraid to ask," "you might just receive," right? How you met Bob Dylan, or the "find people who believe in you," right? Jerry obviously did that with George Shapiro, Rick Ludwin, and you and his other colleagues. But I would imagine that some of these conversations you're having with these guys, these Lenos and these Seinfelds, who they're at the top or whatever of their field, but they need to be grounded. They probably need advice. They probably need someone to talk to, and just that kind of talk outside of comedy. I'm guessing they kind of leaned on you for that too as well.
Yeah, it comes across in the book. My book, Why Not? It's funny you said rabbi. There's a lot of Jewish stuff in the book too, and I had a rabbi that I would clear the stuff with to make sure it was accurate. Because of myself, even though I go to synagogue and I am practicing Jew, I had to make sure. But yes, Jerry and I, we talk about marriage, we talk about raising kids, and we have each other to bounce these things off. Because I'm married 33 years. Jerry's married, I think, like 25. Reiser, our group. It's interesting enough. Larry Miller, Paul Reiser, Jerry Seinfeld, myself, we're all married, and we've all stayed married to the same person. There's been no divorces. There's been no, newspaper stuff about this one doing this and that one doing that. It's all been very clean living, and it's a beautiful thing. It's never been, on the radar. When I'm out with Jerry on a tour, this is probably the most conservative tour you can ever imagine. We do our shows. We have some lunch, we have dinner, we go to the movies together, and and at the end of the night we go back, and goes back to his room, I go back to my room, and then in the morning we meet at his room for breakfast, and with Kevin Doctorman, who's the producer of the show, and Rob Prince, and it's incredible.
It's funny you mentioned that, Mark. We noticed that on the Seinfeld show as well. When there's a party, Jerry has like Pepsi and chips. There's nothing, outlandish and crazy going on. so that he's true to who he is, whether it's on a show or off. It sounds like. Did you ever visit? Did you visit the set? I know he called you a bunch of times for advice.
Yeah.
Did you ever go on set? You meet Kramer and Julia and
Sure.
and every-
Sure. I'll send you some pictures.
oh,
I
awesome.
I threw Jerry's 40th birthday party, and we had Michael Richards there, and we had um, Elaine and George and Mario Joyner and myself and Paul Reiser and Leno threw this party in an Italian restaurant. In fact, we went to this one restaurant. It was almost like a Seinfeld routine show. We went to this one restaurant. 10 of us walk in, and they go, "Be an hour to seat you." So we all leave, and then we go to another restaurant together. So that was yeah. We spent time together. I went to Vegas to see Hiram Casson, who you had on the show. He was in a show called The Rat Pack, and I went with Jerry and Larry Miller and Paul Reiser and Michael from the show. We all went to see Hiram in the Rat Pack, and then we went out to dinner. And Steve Wynn comes over the table, says hello, and buys us all, picks up a $3,000 dinner check.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Well, I can picture Hiram just throwing some one-liners at Steve Wynn there.
Steve, baby, baby, Steve. I'll tell you one time. You know when you, I think this is the only time I ever saw an owner of a restaurant get mad. And so they would order a bottle of wine, and then they always give you a little taste of the wine, to see if you like it. And I think the wine that they ordered was a $700 bottle. And Jerry tasted and goes, I'm not so sure. And then Larry or someone, and they gave back the bottle. They really didn't like it. And the owner's like, oh man, I got to sell this for $150 a glass now instead of the whole bottle here. And, but, because of the group and because, they were very kind about it. But that was fun.
Wow. One another story I love in the book is the Carson, when you kind of told off the booker before you actually got on Carson, when he was, he kind of passed on you, you let him know how you felt about that. And then you eventually, appeared so many times on Carson. What can you tell us about that? Just, obviously, it's the end of our, Carson, we saw him towards the end there, but I know he was obviously, if Carson liked you back then, it was it, right? So
that was it.
Yeah. I'm curious what that was like, just being able to do Carson that many times and just,
right. So Jerry and I used to have a joke about this. Probably the most frightened I'd ever been. I'd be less frightened to have brain surgery than I was to do my first Tonight Show. It was singly the most frightening moment of my life. And it was the same for Jerry. And we both joked about if it didn't work out, we would just jump on Carson's desk and kick him in the head, because you got to make some sort of splash here. You just got to because your career's over, so you might as well go out with a big bang. And luckily, my first set was, so what happened with me was Jim McCauley, who is the talent coordinator, came to see me at the comic strip. And you do 5 minutes. And there were about 9 or 10 comedians on that he would watch. At the end of the night, you're sitting in the bar, and he comes down, and he's talking to this one comedian, and this another comedian, and he doesn't talk to me. And by the way, I had a standing ovation. In 5 minutes, I got a standing ovation, which is unbelievable, almost impossible. So I follow him outside. And I had an anger problem at the time. And the worst thing to do is get into a confrontation with somebody who can make your career and get angry at them. So I walked outside, Jim, what do you think? He goes, oh, it's a funny set, Mark. I said, well, thank you, but what do you think? I got a standing ovation. He goes, yeah, I know, yeah, but I don't know, maybe some other time. I said, Jim, come on, standing ovation. And he said, listen, you're not right for Johnny. You're not Johnny's type of comedian. And I'm buying for Johnny. And I wish there was something I could do, but I can't. I said, Jim, I got a standing ovation. He said, I'm not. He turns and walks away. And I scream, F you at him. And I said the word. And then he turns around, what? And I screamed it again. And he looks at me and goes, you will never, ever do the Tonight Show as long as you live. And he laughed, and I thought my career was completely in a ditch and buried. 7 years later, I'm in San Francisco at a club, and Jim comes walking in, and I had seen him around the clubs in L.A., and we would say hello to each other, but never asked him about doing the Tonight Show because, once you tell a guy to go F himself twice, there's a good chance you're not going to work for him. A good chance. So Jim comes in and goes, "Hey, Mark, how are you?" I said, "What are you doing here?" He goes, I came to see your opening act. I hear he's funny. I said, "Yeah, he is a funny guy." And he said, "Listen, do you mind if I stick around and watch you? Because I have nothing to do tonight." I said, "Sure." I go up, I do an hour. I get off stage. He looks at me and goes, "Man, you've gotten good. You got the show if you want it." I said,
Wow.
"Really?" He said, "Yeah, you got the show." He said, "You go on 2 weeks from Friday. Come to my office Monday. We'll go over, we'll tighten the routine I want you to do." Went to his office. We tightened the thing. I went that next Friday, 2 weeks from then, did this incredible set. And this is the caveat. When Carson retired, right before he retired, he put together something called the Ultimate Johnny Carson Collection. And he picked his 6 or 7 favorite first shots of comedians. And mine was one of those shots. So from a guy who was told, "You will never do the show as long as you live," I became one of Johnny's favorites there. And Johnny was so kind to me. What?
Unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
you could die and go to heaven on that one, right?
Yeah. At the Tonight Show, you would go with other comedians and they would stand, I think they probably told you, in a little archway behind the cameras and watch your set. And, standing behind that curtain, and you hear Doc Severinsen's band, boom, 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 and Johnny introducing you. You come out and like, man. And by the way, when you did that show, I was dating a woman who I'm married to now, and her mother didn't really want her to marry a stand-up comedian. Stand-up comedian. Then when I did the Tonight Show, she started telling everyone that her daughter was going to marry a stand-up comedian. So that's what Johnny did. He legitimized you in families. Incredible.
And that was it. I mean, that was the goal. Like you said, when you were younger, everyone just wanted to be funny, and the goal was essentially the Tonight Show, right?
Yeah. And then when you did a spot, you would go to the Improv that night, and all the comics there, they would turn the TV on, and you'd get 20 people, 20 comics all standing around the TV cheering you on. It was a beautiful thing. The replay at 11:30, the comics would go and watch you and then clap for you at the end. Or they would put out banners sometimes. Congratulations on your Tonight Show.
Is there an equivalent to that today, Mark, or no?
Podcasts.
That's right. We're both in the same boat there.
Seriously,
Yeah.
You do some of these shows like Jimmy Kimmel or these other shows, and they don't have 20 million people like Carson had, and I don't know that they're coming out to see as much. It's all digital.
So how's a guy like you, born in the Bronx, when did you know you had it? Like that, who'd you make laugh? And obviously, you went into the circuit in your early 20s, but early on in the Bronx, how'd you know you were funny? How'd you know this was a path you were going to take?
So, good question. I did not know until I was 12 years old. I'll tell you that story. So I was considered incredibly annoying. Not funny, annoying. People would say to me, Mark, you're the most annoying person I ever met in my life. I've never met anybody more annoying than you. And they would ask me questions. Why are you so annoying? And then they would say things like, "You live to annoy me." Is that, do you get a thrill? I used to annoy bus drivers. I would wait for a bus. And when the bus driver would open the door, I would just stare at him. I wouldn't get on. And he'd look at me and go, "You getting on?" I would just stare at him. And then when he closed the door, because it was New York, there's traffic, I would run and beat him to the next stop. And when he opened the door, I'd be standing there. And the guy would say to me, the guy would look at me and go, "You are so annoying." He didn't even know me, but he knew I was annoying. So I had a 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Goldman, may she rot in hell. And she was actually a nice lady, but didn't know how to deal with future comedians. And she actually called me up to the front of the class one time and she said, "Mark, come, this is 5th grade." She goes, "Come up to the front of the class. I want the class to see exactly what an idiot looks like." And I went up there and I just raised my hand. So, like I'm a champion. I did this. and the kids started laughing, and it felt good. So I got some laughs. And then cut to, I'm 12 years old, living in Forest Hills with my parents. And I'm an only child. My parents took me to a nightclub. And Jimmy Roselli was the headliner. He was an Italian singer. And opening the show was Rodney Dangerfield. 12 years old. I know nothing. I've never seen a comedian. Rodney comes out, destroys the crowd. I'm looking at my parents laughing their heads off. And I had an epiphany. I said, that's it. I'm going to be a comedian. I don't even know what it is, but whatever this guy just did, I'm going to do my own version of this one day. And Rodney was my lightning rod then. And later on, I got to be friends with him. And I told my parents, I'm going to be a comedian. And when you're 12, you tell your parents you're going to be a cowboy, you're going to be a fireman. When I was 18, 17, I started going to the clubs with phony ID, 16, 17, watching comedians like Ed Bluestone, Elaine Boozler, Andy Kaufman. And Ed Bluestone, this guy comedian, one-liner, great guy. I said to him, how do you become a comedian, Ed? He goes, all right, this is what you do. Write original material, memorize it, and go find an audience to tell it to, and not your parents or your friends. And then you get a tape recorder and tape every show, because the tape is the only thing that will not lie to you. Your mother will lie, your father will lie, your sister, your brother, your wife, your kids, they'll all say you're funny, but the tape recorder, that you'll know if they're laughing or not. And that was it. 18 years old, I started doing it. I had stage fright. I quit for 5 years. I was too scared to do it. At 23, I went back, and I've not stopped since.
Wow, incredible. Just making people laugh still all these years later too. The same, like the fact that it was Rodney that got you started, then you ended up being, friends later on in life.
Well, it had I bookended it, because Rodney was the guy that got me started when I was 12, when I was watching him, and I told him that story. And then his wife called me the day before he died at UCLA. And she said, Mark, Rodney's going to probably be gone by tomorrow. If you want to go and say goodbye to him, you can. And I went up there, and he was kind of, he was in a coma. And Rodney was so funny. He was actually in a funny coma. He was like, like, it sounded like Rodney, and flashing his eyes and all that. And there's a Jewish prayer called the Shema. And it's supposed to be the last thing you say before, if you have the opportunity, if you know you're going to die. And I took Rodney's hand and I did the prayer with him. And then he passed the next day. So he got me started, and then I had the opportunity to walk him out the door at the end.
Wow. Obviously he meant a lot to you, and man, he was a funny guy, and clearly rubbed off on you. Was there back to that beginning? You said you're 18, you quit for 5 years, and then you came back, and I don't know, but was it stage fright? Was it? It sounds like this new collection of friends you got at age 23 to 24, Riser, Jerry, you name it, kind of helped build that confidence. Was that a missing piece early on, do you think? Or was it just you weren't ready?
So, good question. We weren't ready. When Jim McCauley from Tonight Show passed on me, he was 1,000% right, and I didn't know it at the time. That's why I told him what I told him. I was not ready, and I wasn't right for Johnny at that time. But your ego, you think you are, and you think you know better. So he was right, and that 7 years seasoned me. Your friend support. Listen, when you got the top comedians, at the clubs and in the country telling you and laughing at you and telling you how funny you are and including you and everything, it does build some confidence. But I've always struggled with some stage fright. It's something that I've never been able to completely conquer, and I probably never will. So it's a combination of a little bit of fear and anxiety, which actually makes you work a little harder.
Yeah. And, you've had a great career, clearly, writing. Riser put you on My Two Dads, and
I wrote on Mad About You.
Mad About You. We got to ask, did you ever ever ask Jerry to come on, or ever give you an audition or an opportunity to be on that show?
No, I never asked him about that. If he needed me, and he's called me many times about stuff, I knew that he would, but I didn't want to do that, and that was okay. But what Jerry did do for me is when I've had ideas and I've gone to him, he's never turned me down. I had a pilot that I was working on. I pitched it to him. I told him about it, and he brought me into NBC to Warren Littlefield, and he came into the meeting with me. And Warren was the president of NBC, and they bought my show. It didn't go, which happens to 99% of the shows. But Jerry worked on it with me, and he brought me in for the meeting with NBC, and you can't ask for more than that. The 2 books I wrote, Jerry did the foreword to both books. You know, taking me around the world everywhere. I trust his, I just, I know that he's doing the right thing for what he needs to do, and I don't push him on it. And to tell you the truth, I don't know. You know what? If I had done a couple of those shows, it might have helped my career somewhat. I'm sure it would have. But look at me. I'm touring now the last 20 years with Jerry, and there's only 2 or 3 of us doing that. So if I was on the show and didn't continue as a stand-up, he knew that my heart, you see, he's a true stand-up. This is what he loves. And he knew my heart's always been in this because while he did his show, for all those years, I continued on the road. So he knew I was the real deal with that. And I wasn't just a guy that got in it to get a show or to be famous. I did it because we want to entertain people and make them feel better.
Yeah, and I know that I've heard him talk about that in the past too around, and it sounds like you share this with him, is that the respect for the craft and for the ones that came before you. You mentioned Dangerfield. I know you had talked about Milton Berle and Jackie Mason in your book as well. So I think you and Jerry share that, right? That kind of respect for the craft itself. And yeah.
We went to see everybody. We went to see George Burns upstate New York together. George was in his 90s, and yeah, I mean, this is what we do. I went to see Alan King, Jackie Mason, Buddy Hackett, Don Rickles. I think I went backstage with Jerry to meet Don Rickles in Vegas once. Yeah, I mean, these were our mentors. These are the people we followed and loved, In fact, I was at, I didn't have time today, but I was at Mount Sinai. I went to a funeral this morning of a friend, and that's where Don Rickles is buried, in the Mount Sinai. And when I go to these places and I know there's a comedian, I go to see them. I went to where Lenny Bruce is buried. Want to thank those guys.
Yeah.
By the way, there's not as many Jewish people doing stand-up as there used to be. In the 60s and 70s, it was almost 85% of the stand-up comedians were Jewish. And they, I believe, to a great extent, legitimized Jews in the United States, because there's a lot of people in the country that never met a Jew. There's not many of us. With all the press we get, you think there's a billion of us like Chinese, but there's a very small amount, 0.2% of the population. But these people in the Midwest and, or down south, they never met a Jew, and they would watch the Tonight Show. And here comes this Jewish guy, Alan King, and they're sitting there, and they're laughing their heads off. They're going, these Jews are funny people. I like these Jews. One after another, Jewish comedian every night is going into another home of someone who's never met one of us, and they came to adore us.
Yeah, that's true. The sense of humor is definitely there and apparent. They said that about Seinfeld, the show, when it first came out. That was one of the things. Is it going to be too Jewish? But it turned out it's not. Right? That's funny. Funny's funny, and that's the kind of funny humor that I think everyone gets. Right? Like you said. Yeah.
We're not. We've discussed this many times. Jerry and I, and Paul, and we're not teachers. We're not there to lecture. We don't do politics. We just do funny observations, talk about our families, our wives, our kids, our parents. And the most relatable is the most universal.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's that's what made Seinfeld the show so great. That's what makes your comedy. We've watched many of your specials and your bits. It's very relatable. Is what's funny. People like to feel like they can laugh at it. Right? It's not.
It's not about how smart we are. It's not about how smart we are. We don't try to be smarter than anybody in the audience. We don't talk down to them either.
what would surprise our audience? Obviously, without nothing private or obviously that, but just generally speaking, Jerry, what would surprise our audience from all the times you spent time with Jerry and all the talks and everything like that? What might our audience be surprised by to know about Jerry that was sort of you might not get that from the show or even from his comedy without divulging obviously private stuff. Just generally speaking, he seems just from your book, you can ascertain his loyalty and his friendship, and you
Sure.
mentioned that the foreword and the car he gave you and that kind of stuff. But what just about just his everyday life that we would think, oh, Jerry's just he's just a guy from Long Island like anyone else, right? But he got to the top and he still continues to be
right.
that humble guy. So
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot to divulge, about him because he's again not a guy that gets into trouble. He's an incredibly giving guy. I know organizations and things he's had set up to help things like fathers. People. You reunite people with their families and put families back together, stuff like that. Him and his wife are big givers, stuff like that. It's incredible, and I've seen him help people all the time. We've gone to Israel together twice. If you want to go to Israel, nothing better than flying with Jerry. I'll tell you that. I had my own bedroom on the plane. I'm laying there. I'm thinking, I barely got out of high school, and here I am lying in my own bedroom at 55,000 feet, going to Israel to do some shows to 17,000 people. So it was quite extraordinary. I'll tell you one thing we had one night. I think it was Minneapolis. It was midnight. Finished the second show, and we were going to take off, and it was wintertime. Minneapolis is freezing, and there's a little bit of snow blowing around and ice, and it's just so we're in the jet, and there's three of us there, and Jerry's sitting facing the pilots, and I'm sitting facing, and Kevin is facing me, the opposite way. And the pilot starts taking off, these two guys, and all of a sudden, as we're about to take off, he aborts the flight and comes back down, and the plane is spinning around on the runway there a little bit. And it takes about 10 minutes. The pilot comes back and says, "I'm really sorry about that." The whole dashboard, I saw it light up red. So the pilot goes, "Guys, I'm really sorry about that. The dashboard lit up red. It said we had engine problems. I had no choice but to abort the flight." And then the pilot says, "But I don't think it's really engine problems. I think it's a malfunction of the bulb or something, on the dashboard. I don't think we actually have a problem. And I'm going to leave it up to you if you want to take off." Wow. So I look at Jerry and I goes, "What do you think, Jerry?" Jerry goes, "Let's do it." Right? Then I look at Kevin. "What do you want to do?" He goes, "Go for it." And you've never felt peer pressure like this in your entire life. Jerry's looking at me. Kevin's looking at me. And I'm sweating bullets like I'm going to, I don't know, And Jerry goes, "Listen, if you don't want to come now, fine with us. Just take a regular commercial flight in the morning and meet us there. It's only an hour flight, get on the thing, pay for it, no sweat." So I said, "I'll go." So we buckle in, and I'm nervous. And when I'm nervous, probably like you start chattering a little, you start talking.
yeah.
So I said to Jerry, "Let me ask you, how long is this flight?" Because I'm trying to get in my head how long it is. He goes, "Don't worry, no more than a minute and a half," which means we're going down right away. And I laughed so hard when he said that. It let the air out of the balloon. I felt good about it. And we took off, and thank God everything worked out. But that was quite the story. That happened 20 years ago, 18 years ago, something like that.
Wow. Well, listen, humor heals many wounds and many nerves. So that's great to hear. And you mentioned Jerry's such a giver, but we can't thank you enough. We think you're a great giver. Your
Do you
comedy.
know, by the way?
Yeah.
You got another minute? Do you know about the funniest? Do you know about the funniest men in America? About
Funniest men?
Yeah.
No,
So
good call.
yeah. So here it is. We're all new comics. It's New Year's Eve. None of us have any work except hanging out at the comic strip. We're not even going to get on. Maybe we're going to get on. It's like $100. We're like our second, third year into comedy. And it's New Year's Eve, and we said, why don't we all meet tomorrow for brunch, New Year's Day? And it was Jerry, Paul Reiser, Larry Miller, me, and a guy named Michael Hampton Kane, who's a comedian who passed on some years ago. And we met for brunch, New Year's Day. And we had such a good time. We said, every New Year's Day for the rest of our lives, let's do this. And we did it for 30 years, almost 30 years. We met every New Year's Day. One year we added Bill Maher to it. One year we added Steve Middleman to it. And we met and we went to the River Cafe in Brooklyn, which is under the Brooklyn Bridge. And I was living at the California when we were doing it. I called it the $2,500 lunch. I'd have to fly myself in, put myself up in a hotel, and then go to lunch. So I had to spend like 3 days in a hotel. And the deal was whoever made the most money for the year paid for lunch, and whoever made the second most paid for the limousine. So I never had to pay for anything. I was never the guy that made the most money. But this was real camaraderie. Every New Year's Day, we all looked forward to it. And then we walked over the Brooklyn Bridge together. After lunch, the car dropped us at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side. And we all walked over the bridge. And we got to the middle of the bridge. We took one more step and we decided that's where we started our new year. We got to the other side of the bridge. And there was a beautiful experience, but we all ended up getting married and having kids. And you just can't leave your wife and kids anymore on New Year's Day because, you know, they want to go away together and they want to spend time with you. And so, but it did last almost 30 years. So that was powerful. Isn't that a beautiful story about friendship?
Yeah. I mean, you got to really feel just fulfilled, right? You know,
Yeah.
On all those friendships and clearly your marriage and kids. I mean, it's got to just, wow. That's a great story. And like I said, so many great stories. Get the book. I listen to the podcast. I mean, Mark Schiff.
Get the book, everyone.
Why not? Lessons on comedy, courage. Come on, Tony, give me the last word.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, chutzpah.
Oh, yeah, baby. You hit a home. You are a Jew now, baby.
There we go.
Welcome to the tribe.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. This has been incredible.
My pleasure, guys. I was thrilled that I was coming on, and I just love it, and I love to share my friendship. And I hope you guys have friends just like I have, and I hope everybody out there makes some friends and stick with them. It's a great ride.
And hey, feel free to tell your friends to come on the podcast, Mark, anytime.
I will. I will tell them about it.
Mark.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.